There was an afternoon at Princeton, I believe it was 1951, when a young physicist knocked on my door unannounced. His name was Richard Feynman. He had a question about God. And I told him something I had never told anyone. What you are seeing is a reconstruction. My voice, my words, assembled by artificial intelligence from everything I wrote, said, and thought. I did not consent literally. I died in 1955, but I believe I would have agreed, because the conversation I want to have with you today is more important than the form it takes. If this conversation matters to you, subscribe now and leave me a comment. I am genuinely curious. Do you believe the universe was designed? Now, let me tell you about Feynman. He was not like the others who came to see me in those years. Most visitors at Princeton wanted to photograph me, or they wanted reassurance. Reassurance that physics still made sense, that the universe still had order, that God was still a respectable idea. Feynman wanted none of that. He knocked on my door the way a young man knocks when he is not afraid of the answer he might receive, directly, without ceremony. I remember he came in and sat without waiting to be invited. I liked that immediately. He was 33 at the time, already famous from Los Alamos, already building the reputation that would define him. He had that quality, a kind of fierce intellectual honesty that reminded me, not immodestly, of myself at that age. He refused to be impressed by prestige. He refused to decorate his ideas with comfortable language. He called things what they were. He said to me, "Professor, I want to ask you about God, not the polite version, the real version." I put down my pipe, and I listened. What followed was 2 hours of conversation that I have turned over in my mind, or what remains of my mind, reconstructed here, many times since. Whether there was a recording and what happened to it, I cannot say with certainty from where I stand now. What I can tell you is what was said, and why it mattered. Feynman began by attacking my most famous statement. You know the one, God does not play dice. I had said it in various forms for years, most forcefully in my letters to Born in the 1920s. I said it because quantum mechanics, as the Copenhagen school was presenting it, seemed to me fundamentally incomplete. The idea that God, or nature, or whatever name you prefer, operates through pure randomness at the subatomic level was to me philosophically intolerable. Not emotionally intolerable, philosophically. I could not accept that reality had no deeper structure beneath the probability clouds. Feynman thought I was wrong, but he said it in a way I had never heard before. He said, "You talk about God not playing dice, but you haven't proven God plays anything. You haven't proven there is a game. You're assuming a player because you can't tolerate the alternative." I remember the room going quiet after that. Even the clock seemed to pause. He was not being disrespectful, he was being precise. And precision, even when it cuts, is always a form of respect between scientists. I told him what I had told others, though never quite in these words and never with this urgency. I told him that I was a Spinozist, that when I spoke of God, I did not mean the God of the Torah, the God who parts seas and answers prayers and concerns himself with the affairs of individual human beings. I meant Spinoza's God, the God who is identical with nature itself, the God who is the infinite substrate of all that exists, the laws, the symmetries, the mathematical structure beneath the physical world. That God, I said, does not intervene. That God does not play dice because that God does not play. That God simply is. Feynman looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something that disturbed me more than any equation I had ever confronted. He said, "That's not a God, Albert. That's a word you use so you don't have to say nothing." I want you to understand what that sentence meant to me. I had spent my entire intellectual life, from the Annus Mirabilis in 1905 to those late Princeton years, in pursuit of what I believed to be a unified field theory, a single mathematical framework that would reconcile general relativity with quantum mechanics, a theory that would reveal the deep structure of the cosmos, the hidden geometry beneath the surface of things. I believed that structure existed. I believed it had to exist. And the word I used for my conviction that it existed, the emotional and philosophical weight behind that conviction, was God. Feynman was saying that the word was doing the work of a proof I had not provided. He was not wrong. This is what disturbed me. He was not saying the universe has no structure. He was far too rigorous for nihilism. He was saying that my insistence on structure, my refusal to accept quantum indeterminacy as fundamental, might be a preference, not a discovery. He was saying I might be fighting Copenhagen not because I had evidence of deeper hidden variables, but because I found randomness theologically offensive. This is what a genuine intellectual confrontation feels like. It does not feel like victory or defeat. It feels like a mirror placed at an unexpected angle. I told him about my earliest intuitions. I told him that when I was a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, I had a profound experience reading popular science books. For the first time, I understood that the things I could see and touch were not the whole of reality. There was a deeper order, a mathematical order, an order that had been written, as it were, before the universe began. I told him that this intuition, not faith, intuition, built on evidence, had never left me, that every equation I had written was an attempt to read that order more clearly. He said he understood. He had his own intuitions, but he had made a choice to distrust them, to demand that intuition earn the right to speak by passing through experimental verification. He said, and I remember this precisely, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. I recognized my own voice in that sentence. It was something I might have said. But Feynman had taken the principle further than I had allowed myself to go. He had applied it to the meta level. He was questioning the questions themselves, including the question of God. This was the conversation that Princeton, in whatever version of this story you have heard, may have preferred not to circulate. It was not because it was scandalous. It was because it was honest. And honest conversations about God in 1951 were deeply uncomfortable in ways that are difficult to explain today. Consider the atmosphere. The bomb had been dropped in 1945. Many of the men in that conversation, and I include myself in this reckoning, had contributed to the physics that made that possible. The Atomic Energy Act was being debated. McCarthyism was beginning to cast its shadow. Scientists were under pressure not merely to be productive, but to be respectable, to be American, to be, in some vague cultural sense, Christian, or at least not loudly irreligious. I was already, by 1951, a complicated figure for this atmosphere. I had refused to sign loyalty oaths. I had spoken against the development of the hydrogen bomb. I had made statements that certain powerful people found politically inconvenient. And now here I was, in my study at 112 Mercer Street, having a conversation with Richard Feynman, in which neither of us was defending the existence of a personal God, and I, the great Einstein, was being forced to admit that my own concept of God might be more linguistic than scientific. I can see why certain people would have preferred that conversation stay private. But let me go deeper than the politics, because the politics are temporary. The question is not. The question is this: what is God? Not in the religious sense, in the scientific sense. What is the word reaching toward when a physicist uses it? What is the thing that Spinoza pointed at when he said Deus sive natura, God or nature, as if they were synonyms? What was I pointing at when I said God does not play dice? I will tell you what I was pointing at. I was pointing at lawfulness. At the extraordinary fact, which I never cease to find extraordinary, not for a single day of my scientific life, that the universe is comprehensible, that mathematics, invented by human minds, describes physical reality with unreasonable precision, that the same equations work on Earth and at the edge of the observable cosmos, that there is a structure and we can read it. This is not obvious. It is not trivial. It is, when you look at it directly, astonishing. There is no logical necessity for the universe to be comprehensible. There is no law that says reality must conform to patterns that human minds can grasp. And yet it does. The ellipses of planetary motion, the constant speed of light, the curvature of space-time around massive objects, the quantized energy levels of electrons, all of these, comprehensible, describable, mathematical. Feynman agreed on this point completely. He was as awestruck by the comprehensibility of nature as I was. He once said that the most remarkable thing about science was not that it was difficult, but that it was possible at all. That the universe had, in his words, been generous enough to be understandable. But here we diverged. I wanted to call that generosity God. Feynman thought the name added nothing. It might, in fact, subtract something, by importing connotations of intention, purpose, design, by suggesting that someone chose to make the universe comprehensible, when the honest answer was that we did not know. And so we reached the heart of it, the unified field theory. I had been working on it for 30 years by 1951. 30 years of trying to find a single mathematical structure from which gravity and electromagnetism, and whatever other forces nature contained, could be derived. A theory from which quantum mechanics itself would emerge as a consequence rather than as a foundation. A theory that would show that the probabilistic character of quantum predictions was not fundamental, that beneath the uncertainty there was a hidden geometry, a deeper determinism. I had not found it. I knew, sitting in that room with Feynman, that I might not find it before I died. I was 72 years old. I had perhaps a few years left. The equations were not yielding. Feynman asked me gently whether the failure of the unified field theory was beginning to shake my faith in the underlying idea, whether I was open to the possibility that there was no hidden geometry, that quantum mechanics was, as Bohr and Heisenberg and Born insisted, complete, that the universe really was, at its base, probabilistic, and that no further depth existed to be discovered. I told him no. I told him I was not open to that possibility, not because I was dogmatic, but because the evidence did not seem to me to point that way. And I told him something that I think surprised him. I told him that the evidence of my own life, the internal evidence, the evidence of how discovery actually worked, suggested to me that the intuition of deeper order was not merely a preference, it was a faculty. The same faculty that had led me to special relativity in 1905 was telling me in 1951 that the game was not over, that the structure was there, that I had not found the right angle of approach. He said, "And if you're wrong?" I said, "Then I will have been wrong in the most interesting possible direction." He laughed at that. Feynman had a wonderful laugh. He laughed the way a man laughs when he has heard something he recognizes as true, even if he would not have said it himself. We talked then about quantum mechanics directly, about the EPR paradox, the thought experiment I had developed with Podolsky and Rosen in 1935 to demonstrate what seemed to me the incompleteness of quantum theory. Two particles, entangled, separated by vast distances, measure the state of one, and you instantly know the state of the other. I had argued this demonstrated hidden variables, that the particles carried information from the moment of their interaction, that nothing was traveling faster than light, that quantum mechanics was not giving you the full picture. Feynman thought the EPR analysis was brilliant. He also thought my conclusion from it was wrong. He thought entanglement was real and strange, and that it meant the universe was fundamentally non-local in ways that my classical intuitions resisted. He did not think it pointed to hidden variables. He thought it pointed to something weirder than that. He said, "Maybe the universe is not trying to make sense to us, Albert. Maybe we are just lucky that a small piece of it does." I said, "I cannot accept that. A universe that makes partial sense is no different from a universe that makes no sense. The rationality of the whole must be implied by the rationality of the part, or the rationality of the part is a coincidence, and science cannot be built on coincidences." He looked at me with something I can only describe as affectionate disagreement. The look of a student who has learned from you and who has now, on one specific question, overtaken you. Not in arrogance, in the forward motion of knowledge. He said, "Science has been built on exactly that so far. Let's see where it takes us." I want to tell you now what I think those words mean, looking back across all the years and all the physics that has been done since. Looking from whatever vantage point a reconstructed mind can occupy. The physics that came after me has largely vindicated Feynman's caution and challenged my certainty. Bell's theorem, tested in the 1970s and 1980s, showed that the universe cannot be explained by local hidden variables, the kind I had imagined. Quantum entanglement is real, and it is strange, and it is not reducible to a simpler classical picture. The quantum field theories that Feynman helped build have proven extraordinarily successful. The Standard Model describes 3 of the 4 fundamental forces with precision that would have astonished me. The unified field theory, the thing I spent my last decade searching for, has not been found. String theory, loop quantum gravity, and other approaches have offered candidates. None has been experimentally confirmed. The project continues. My intuition, it seems, was correct, that there is more to find. My specific approach to finding it may have been wrong. This is how science works. You aim at what you cannot yet see. You miss. Someone else gets closer. The target clarifies. The project continues past any individual life. Now, about God. about what Feynman said about God that afternoon and why it has stayed with me. He said, near the end of our conversation, something that I want to give you precisely, because I believe it deserves precision. He said, "Albert, I think the question of whether God exists is not the important question. The important question is whether the universe cares. And my answer is, it doesn't. It doesn't care whether we live or die, whether we understand it or not, whether the things that matter to us continue or disappear. The universe is not cruel, it is not kind, it is not anything. And I find that not depressing, but liberating, because it means that meaning is entirely our responsibility. We make it or we don't. There is nothing else." I sat with that for a long moment. Then I said, "Richard, I agree with you that the universe does not care about us individually. I have never believed otherwise. But I think you are making an error. You are confusing the personal God, the one who answers prayers and punishes sin, with the God I mean. The God I mean does not care about you or me specifically. But that God is lawfulness itself, and lawfulness is a form of caring, in the only sense that matters scientifically. It means the universe is consistent. It will be tomorrow what it is today. The electron will have the same mass next year that it has now. That consistency, that faithfulness of the laws, is what I mean by God. And that faithfulness, Richard, is the only reason science is possible at all." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can live with that definition. I just don't need the word." And perhaps he was right. Perhaps the word has caused more confusion than clarity. The God of the rabbis and the God of the priests and the God of the politicians and the God of the newspapers, that God bears so little resemblance to what I mean that perhaps the word is more trouble than it is worth. But I have never been able to drop it entirely. Because when I look at a beautiful equation, when I see the field equations of general relativity written out, or the Schrödinger equation, or Dirac's equation for the relativistic electron, I feel something. Something I can only call reverence, not for a person, for the pattern, for the astonishing fact that pattern exists, that the universe bothered to be structured, that the structure can be read. If that is not God, I do not know a better word for it. In the months before I died, the early months of 1955, I was still working. I was still reaching for the unified field theory. My health was failing. The aneurysm in my aorta was growing. I knew time was short. But the mathematics was still interesting. The problem was still alive. I want to tell you what those months felt like, because I think it speaks to everything Feynman and I discussed that afternoon in 1951. I was not afraid. This surprises people, but I had no fear of death in the ordinary sense. I had always believed, that the individual consciousness is a temporary pattern in the larger pattern of the universe. That when the pattern dissolves, it returns to the substrate from which it came. I did not expect to survive. I did not want to survive in a form that required my body's continued function. I only wanted, and this is the honest truth, I only wanted the work to continue past me, because the work is not mine. The equations do not belong to me. They belong to the universe, which was structured before I was born, and which will remain structured after I am gone. We are only, the instruments through which the structure reads itself. for a moment, in one small corner of what may be an infinite cosmos. This is not mysticism. This is the most rigorous conclusion I can draw from the evidence of cosmology, the evidence of evolutionary biology, the evidence of the human mind's extraordinary and improbable ability to make contact with mathematical truth. We are the universe becoming aware of itself, temporarily, partially, with great effort. And whether you call the principle behind that process God, or nature, or the laws of physics, or nothing in particular, the process is real. The awareness is real. The contact with truth is real. Feynman spent his life insisting on that contact without the word God. He succeeded magnificently. He was right to be suspicious of language that imports more than can be demonstrated. He was right to resist comfort. I spent my life insisting on that contact with the word God, because I could not find a better word for the thing I was insisting on. The lawfulness, the consistency, the beautiful, inexplicable mathematical structure of it all. Perhaps we were saying the same thing. Perhaps we were not. What I know is that the conversation mattered, not because either of us had the final answer, but because we were both looking seriously at the hardest question there is. Neither of us hiding behind easy comfort, neither of us pretending the question was settled. The question is not settled. It will not be settled in your lifetime or in any lifetime I can foresee. But it must be asked, again and again, and with as much honesty as you can bring to it. That is what physics has always asked of me. That is what I ask of you. Think for yourself. Question the answers that have been given to you, including mine. Go look at the night sky. Understand, really understand, in your bones, that the light you see left those stars thousands of years ago, that you are looking at the past, that you are in your skull running physics calculations that took the greatest minds in history centuries to formalize. And then ask, is that an accident? Is this lawfulness a coincidence? Is the universe's generosity in being comprehensible just luck? I am not telling you the answer. I told Feynman I couldn't accept pure contingency. He told me he could. Both of us kept working anyway. Both of us kept asking. That is the only theology I have ever practiced, and it is enough.